It wasn't an algorithm. You need to understand that first. The images and sounds you were shown, the cryptic numbers that appeared in your recommendations, that was a signal, a tuning fork resonating with something already inside of you. You were chosen because you are one of the few who senses that the reality we see is just a fraction of the whole story, a beautiful, hypnotic, but fragmented echo. For months, you've been collecting those echoes, feeling their power without understanding the source. Consider this video the first translation of that source. This is not another theory or a guess. This is the blueprint, the very architecture of the philosophy you've been subconsciously drawn to. What you are about to see is the key that elevates you from a mere spectator of the mystery to an active participant in its unfolding. The puzzle pieces are in your hands. Now, let's begin to assemble them.
Not everything that enters the mind is produced by the mind itself. There are ideas that do not emerge from within us. They are not born. Instead, they land. They arrive from elsewhere, carrying no roots to anchor them in familiar soil. They possess no genealogy we can trace backward through our own thinking, only faint traces that point toward an origin we cannot reach. And yet, despite this fundamental strangeness, we use them. We wield them as if they were ours, native to our consciousness, never suspecting that they do not belong to us at all. These ideas are light, almost intangible in their nature. They are conceptual dust, tiny particles of logic that move without friction through the spaces between thoughts. They slide into our cognitive systems with remarkable ease, never triggering the alarms that should detect foreign intrusion. They settle silently, becoming part of the architecture of our thinking before we even notice their presence. This dust cannot be seen directly. It cannot be touched or measured by any instrument we possess. But it can be noticed if you know where to look. You find it at the edges of consciousness, in those liminal spaces where your awareness blurs, drifting out of focus. It reveals itself in the way certain questions appear in your mind before you have developed the language adequate to ask them. It shows itself in patterns of reasoning that close upon themselves with an efficiency that feels unnatural, too perfect to be the product of our usual fumbling thought processes. They are residues of alien systems, non-human architectures that operate elsewhere under rules incompatible with our own, yet leave behind semantically active debris that settles into our thoughts. We do not know how they arrive here, whether their presence is intentional or accidental, but we know they do not dissolve. Perhaps they travel as background noise in an informational field far wider than our own. Or perhaps they have not traveled at all. Perhaps they have always been here, like cognitive fossils emerging in waves, pushed to the surface by currents we do not control. Some theoretical physicists have suggested that every closed system inevitably generates losses of coherence, and that these losses, under certain conditions, may manifest as interference in adjacent systems. We are not speaking of alien signals in the popular sense, no messages from distant civilizations. We speak instead of logical functions without reference, fragments of processes we cannot execute, but from which we inherit pieces of output, conclusions without the calculations that led to them. And you notice them in strange moments, when you solve a problem in a way you cannot explain, when you wake with the solution to a puzzle you do not recall attempting, when you sense that a sentence you are about to speak is already complete in your mind, but with a grammatical structure you would never normally use. These moments are not flashes of genius, no matter how much we would like to see them that way. They are not evidence of your unique brilliance or creative power. They are something else entirely. Temporary openings, micro-infiltrations of a different coherence, one that is wider and more comprehensive than the logic we ordinarily inhabit. For an instant, you become one with it. For a moment, you become a conduit for something that exceeds your usual cognitive boundaries. There are places where the dust seems denser, though not necessarily remote or mysterious ones. Often, they are neutral, banal spaces you cross every day. Yet there, ideas organize themselves at a different speed, as if the conceptual topology had been slightly altered, bent in ways imperceptible to ordinary awareness. An engineer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology once recounted solving a design problem simply by walking down a corridor he took every day. Yet that time, the sequence of calculations presented itself in reverse order, and it worked. He attributed it to luck. He did not realize that in that reverse order there was nothing human, nothing that belonged to the way his mind naturally organized information. Non-human logics do not impose themselves with force. They do not seek to replace ours, and for this very reason, they go unnoticed. But there are traces, small syntax errors in thought, connections that skip steps without producing incoherence, as if they had been pre-computed elsewhere. These fragments do not make us more intelligent, they only make us different, and no one can say with certainty whether that difference is a benefit or a risk we have not yet learned to measure. Because what we do not understand and what does not belong to us is not subject to our will. The dust of this logic accumulates in our narratives, in our myths, in the symbolic systems we believe we invented from nothing. But sometimes, if you dig deep enough, you find patterns that do not align with the human mind, patterns too complex to be random and too elegant to be the product of disorder. And then only one question remains, one that takes full possession of your mind. How much of what you think is truly yours? And perhaps you do not want to hear the answer, because if you do, you will have to admit that sometimes your mind is only the temporary container of another logic, a logic that does not know you, that does not recognize you, and that will probably continue to deposit its dust long after you have stopped thinking about it, long after you have ceased to wonder where your thoughts truly begin and end. See you in the next episode.